welcome to the 6th episode of Thought Leadership Interviews Talking on Water. Today I'm delighted to welcome Chris Loughlin, our chairman. So Chris, welcome.
Thank you, very nice to see you, and thanks for inviting me. And they've been a great success so far. I've been very impressed with them.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with my first question. So you successfully led South West Water from 2006 and then Pennon Group from 2016. What would you say are the most pressing challenges that need to be addressed by the UK water industry?
Well, it's a good question, and probably if I do look back over the 14 years, you can see that the pace of change in society in our industry is changing really, really quickly, and a lot of things have changed over that period of time. But if you look at the challenges facing the industry, they're probably the same as they've ever been, and probably constant and unchanging for quite a few years now. And I think they're probably at the high level stated as climate change and weather volatility. And, I think our industry is at the front of that particular battle, on the front line really in that battle, whether it be resilient mitigation or adaptation to climate change and weather volatility. So that's there, and that really is the number one issue facing us as an industry, it seems to me. On top of that, we've got population growth, the ever-increasing population growth here in the UK. But if you look on a global stage, it's more urbanisation, moving to populations moving towards large conurbations. But again, focusing on the UK here, that's more about rising customer expectations. And I think that has changed over the last few years, and certainly over the last decade or two. I mean, just an example of that is, the water resource management plans, for example, used to be predicated on the fact that it's okay to have a drought order every few years. It's okay to have standpipes every 25 years. Well, customers just do not expect that level of service now, and their customer expectation of the service and the delivery is completely different to what it was maybe a decade or so earlier. So those are the high-level challenges, but I think they feed into some sort of more detailed implications of what that means to us, and there's a whole range of things, but I think shifting to a truly sustainable industry, truly sustainable business model, that means more emphasis on catchment management, less on, for example, catchment management SUDs and all sorts of things like that, but less on, concrete solutions, hard engineering solutions, more on behavioural solutions, more on soft solutions to us to meet those high-level challenges. I think, as again I mentioned already, resilience in the widest sense, and its true sense, which is about resistance to disruptions to our service and the ability to recover quickly. That's what resilience really means, and we need to think about that very well, so we need to design in for that. Then, as I say, in terms of climate change, it's mitigation means we have our part to play, so the challenges, those big industry challenges about moving towards zero carbon, for example, planting trees and so forth. Those are aspirational goals that we need to follow. And then adaptation in a whole range of implications, whether it be per capita consumption, leakage, etc. And I think another change or challenge facing is embracing technology and digitalisation going forward. So as I say, the pace of the world is changing, but in a sense, the high-level challenges have been with us for a good long while now.
Thank you. I mean, there's been lots of discussions around climate change, net zero targets, and also the value of water keeps coming up, and how can we get people to really understand and appreciate the value of water? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's obviously very, very important, and it's something that I'm sure we'll pick up on during this conversation again in different ways, to be honest. But, the perception of water, the value of water, and therefore how well or otherwise the industry explains what it's trying to do, explains what the challenges are facing the industry are increasingly important to us.
So as British Water's chairman, you are well aware of the frustrations of the supply chain, that they often feel that they are being kept at arm's length from the water utilities. And obviously one of the frustrations that they say is that they can't get their innovations easily into the water company representatives that they might need to speak to. How do you think that this problem can best be resolved?
Yeah, it's a really good area, and it's something in British Water that we concentrate a lot of time and effort on. And to be frank about it, and you know this, Lila, that one of the reasons perhaps I was interested in accepting the role as chairman of British Water when I was first approached some years ago is the fact that that issue is really live, and I felt it firsthand. And it seems to me that the difference between the company and a gap or a frustration between the company and the supply chain is a completely false premise, really, because we're all in this industry together. And we've always, as water companies, we've always relied, or for decades relied on outsourcing the capital delivery programs, for example, increasing the operational deliveries, increasing the technology and innovation comes from the supply chain, and we're all in this same endeavour together. So one of the reasons I was interested in joining was to try and help bring those different parties together. And as you know, it's really possibly part of British Water's mission in a sense, which is obviously to represent the members of our members' interests, which are primarily the supply chain, servicing the UK water industry and abroad, of course, and provide services to them. And one of the biggest services we can provide is to try and bring the technical exchanges, the innovation exchanges, the things that we can bring to the industry to the water companies themselves. So I think one of the issues for British Water is to raise that awareness of the issue, that the fact that there is that frustration. And the way I see it from my perspective, and obviously with the water company hat on as was when I was a chief executive of a water company, it's a source of competitive advantage as far as I would see, is how well or otherwise you engage with the supply chain. And if you have an adversarial or an arm's length a relationship which is driven purely on the transactional cost, where you try and shift the risk away from the water company to the supply chain or the outsourced partner, you're really not going to get the best out of the relationship. And our members live and die and breathe on the international stage with their technology, their expertise, their knowledge. And they are world leaders in many places. And if you keep the supply chain or our members at arm's length, there's a sense of competitive disadvantage if you do that. So how do you do it? And often I hear, and with the British Water hat on, I often hear people talking about the procurement departments as the sort of devil incarnate, almost keeping people away. Well, I've got to say that the procurement departments are not evil or wicked people. They're well-intentioned people, but they're doing what the company thinks is the appropriate thing. So I think there is a role for the leaders of the water companies, if they truly believe that supply chain can bring innovation, technology and best practice to them, to make sure that the guidance, the strategic oversight to the procurement departments is appropriate and does base itself on the sort of collaborative, true, open working, and not that transactional style. So frameworks and I'm just hearing something off stage. So it depends on the CEOs and the leaders of the organisation to make sure that the procurement departments are given the appropriate guidance to make sure that we have true, good collaborative arrangements, not adversarial relationships. So frameworks, alliances with true cooperation, true understanding that both parties are there for good reasons and need to make profits. That's the steer and the guidance that I think we need to give to the procurement departments and therefore to the companies. And also I think the supply chain or the members of British Water, for example, they need to do their part as well and recognise that it can be frustrating. It's always frustrating trying to sell your services, and you'd love to have more opportunities to sell your services to companies. But you have to present something which is easy to adopt by the companies, something that meets their needs, understand and listen to the needs of the companies, and present yourself accordingly. So I think British Water has a great role to play in that, is facilitating and bringing those things, those two thoughts together, really. And we do a pretty good job, but we could do better, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I mean, I think one of the things that we're trying to encourage the water companies to provide is their statement of needs.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're trying to work much more closely with them to get, maybe 3 or 4 bullet points in terms of the statements of needs or any particular solutions or technologies that they're looking for. So that's one of the things that we're looking at in terms of revamping some of the aspects of the UK forum and making sure that the water company liaison meetings and the innovation exchanges, and in fact BW Innovate, are more sort of entwined and interlinked than maybe it has been in previous years. And also, I suppose the other thing that I've brought up is that sometimes when water companies have innovation departments or a head of innovation, they don't necessarily have enough resources or time. And I think sometimes that's why they keep technology companies at arm's length, because they're worried about a flood of inquiries which they then can't respond to. So I think there always has to be adequate resourcing. And I see you smiling, so I'm hoping that maybe you're agreeing, or you might have some further thoughts to add.
No, exactly. I think you're putting your finger on it, Lila, and I think that's a very important dimension to think about. And again, I don't know if it is necessary that the innovation departments are under-resourced, but I think there's an element of, I won't say lack of joined-upness, but there's a lack of coordination within companies from time to time. So, people are very busy doing very difficult operational roles, firefighting with the tools they have, and the ability to stand back, think and reflect about could we do this a different way, which of course is why the innovation or the research and development departments are there. Sometimes they find it hard to sort of really understand and articulate clearly what the operational teams are requiring. And as I say, I think there's a onus on the people selling into or working with the supply chains to understand that and be sympathetic to that. But I think the heart of it, honestly, is true collaborative working through framework agreements and so forth. And I've got to tell you, when I was you might know, I was in the nuclear industry years ago, I think 25, 30 years ago, and I was an engineer and I was involved in buying things from the supply chain. And somebody came up with the idea of an alliance framework, and I was horrified by the thought, you can't do that. You can't open up and give your business needs and your business case to suppliers. They'll take all the money off you. But and that, as an act of faith, as I was very cautious about it, but we did it, and I became a convert 25 years ago, or whatever it was. And I've seen the benefits from that. And I've seen organisations fail or do poorly because they don't absorb that and have that adversarial relationship where they push risk onto the supply chain.
Thank you. And I think one of the other things I'd like to touch on is the fact that we have seen on the Better Together course that we have, and obviously you've participated, that the digital or the need for digital strategies within the water companies has come much more to the fore as a result of COVID-19 and people working from home. So solutions such as drones, AI, robotics, are being much more readily explored than maybe they might have been in the past. So do you see digital innovations as being a key part of that moving forward?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the whole world is moving to absorb and integrate digitalization, whatever that means, and it is a very, very broad term. But I have to say, I think it's to the great credit of the whole industry. That's to say, all of the people that we interact with have responded well because of coronavirus and COVID, and embraced the technology to try and keep the interactions going. But there's so much more we can do, and so much more powerful things we can do with the digital technologies, which I think we're still only scratching the surface at. And I think sometimes, and perhaps we'll come on to talk about this, is that the industry is branded as not being very innovative, and I think that's largely unfair. But anyway, it is a perception. But we can adopt a lot more in the digital space, and a lot more thoughts and energies into improving the way we interact with our customers and provide a service for them. And I can always remember a war story, and I don't know if you remember, if you go back into when the British car industry was all-powerful here. I remember I was a very young guy, and I bought my first car, first new car, and it was from British Leyland. It was a Mini. It was almost like Mr. Bean's Mini, a yellow Mini. And the guy said to me, and I was shocked by it, saying, well, of course it's a new car, and there's always teething problems with it. So what I promise you, as part of our package to you, our service to you, is drive it around for a month, write down everything that's wrong with it, and bring it back, and we'll fix those things for you. And I was thinking, that's weird, because that's the quality control department that they're supposed to have. And if you think about it, our operational model for the water industry is still a little bit like that. We have a call center where people ring in and say what's gone wrong, and we should be able to use digital technology to find out that the water pressure is low, the water is cloudy, there's been a burst. We should have enough technology to do that before the customers even actually embrace it themselves or understand it themselves. And that's an example of where we need to move a step change from where we are, and digital technology is the root of that, I think. Yeah.
I think what you've just said in terms of the sector not being seen as innovative enough is a bit linked to the sort of value of the water industry and how it's perceived to people outside of the industry. So how do you think that we could best present the industry outwardly so that people understand the skills, the experience, the value that's added as a result of all the expertise that goes right across the supply community?
Yeah, I think there's two dimensions to that, Lila, and I think you put your finger on a very important point, really, which is there is a perception that the industry is not innovative. And as I say, I think that perception is a little unfair at best, and at worst, it's completely wrong. It's just not true. But there's no point us saying, well, that's just a mistake, and we are innovative. Honestly, if that perception is real and is there, it needs to be addressed, and people within the industry need to do something about it. So there's a whole range of things, and that's to do with public perception and how we showcase ourselves, how we explain our story, how we communicate with customers, how we communicate with the wider society. It's no point us saying, well, they don't understand us, so it's their fault. They don't understand us, so it's our fault is the issue. So we need to think about how we interact with companies and sell what it is we're doing in a positive and constructive way. And I had hoped that the horrors and the traumas of the coronavirus might actually help us in that regard, because water and sanitation is basically a basic human right. It's fundamental to life, and our employees, everyone working in the industry, is engaged in that fundamentally important activity. And when we had lockdown, our workers were struggling to provide that essential service, and they were designated as key workers. Clearly, they're not on the front line like the NHS workers were, but they were quite close to it, and going out and doing things which they were uncomfortable to do to make sure that the water and sanitation services continued. And I hope that might be a springboard to changing people's perception of what the water industry is about. And I dare say some organisations have done a lot to build on that opportunity that comes out of this tragedy, but I think probably we haven't engaged as well as we could have done, and we could do more in that regard as well. So I think we need to reflect on ourselves on how we present ourselves. I think in terms of innovation and new technologies, I applaud Ofwat's initiative to have an innovation fund. I often complain privately or say, well, it isn't Ofwat's fund, it's customers' money, because it is money that's effectively a levy on customers' bills, which was, put on their bills without the sort of research to say that they wanted it, but it is there. And, I see it as a seed corn and an attempt to set a strategy and set a change of perception and culture within the organisations in the water industries, but also within the wider community and wider society. So I think it's to be applauded, and the idea of the water industry trying to come together with an innovation strategy is also to be applauded. But I think we need to build on that, and I think we need to make sure that we use that as an opportunity to change the perception of the industry, and therefore, get people to truly understand the value of water and sanitation. In my mind, as I say, basic human rights, and how the whole of civilized society will fail. You see that around the world if we don't maintain those essential services, and that's the endeavour that we're involved in, and that's what we should try and present.
Thank you. Now, turning to Ofwat, what changes would you like to see in how the industry is regulated in England and Wales? I know that's a big question, but it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and probably before I answer it directly, and I've got to say, being an economic regulator like Ofwat is probably one of the most difficult and one of the most subtle activities you could possibly imagine, because it's a really hard thing to try and understand. The water companies, the water industry inevitably has more knowledge, more information, more background to any particular subject than an independent regulator can ever have. So that's really hard for them to do that job. And, they have to take judgments every 5 years or so on what's going to happen in the next 5 years. And, the cost of capital, the cost of borrowing, how much investment required, what the implications going to be to volatile weather patterns. those things are unknown, and the companies themselves should know more about that than the regulator, and yet the regulator has to opine. So it's a really difficult job, is what I want to predicate that on. And I think the way you start from thinking about how regulation could be improved or reformed or revised is just focusing on those basic premises. I mean, the water companies, the regulated water companies, have a license from the government to provide essential services, water and sanitation, in a geographical area. And because there isn't true competition, there's an independent regulator to make sure the interests of the customers are protected. And that's what their role is. So the role is to be an economic regulator to protect the interests of customers. It isn't actually to take the leadership role of the industry. That should be the water companies. They have that license from the government to do that. So the leadership, the setting the agenda for the future, should come from the water companies. And if what the regulator, or indeed any of the regulators, feel like they need to step in to offer some guidance on what that leadership is all about, it's probably because the companies themselves aren't filling that void or aren't doing it adequately. So therefore, I think there's the primary responsibility on looking at reform in the industry is probably, and the regulation model, with the industry itself needs to look itself in the mirror and understand why there might be a need for reform. So I've got to say, just to answer your question more directly, I mean, I've been through 3 price reviews now, and obviously there's a lot of people in the industry been through an awful lot more than me, but I thought the last one, PR14, the last but one, was a real brave, philosophical and very astute shift in regulation, really, because it worked on the premise that I've just been talking about, that the companies, the regulated water companies themselves, should know more about their customers, should know more about their customers' wishes and aspirations. And it handed the responsibility to the companies much more formally to say, if you do good, thorough research about what customers want, you do good, thorough research about providing solutions and getting feedback from the customers, if that interaction is top quality and you focused your business plan on what customers want, we won't intervene. We'll leave you to it. And that sort of so-called enhanced or fast-track status was a very brave and powerful thing to do. And there was a realistic sort of incentive for the companies to do that, not only reputationally, but procedurally as a faster approval process and financially as well. And I thought that was a very brave move, which I thought was very, very subtle and very, very sophisticated form of regulation. And in fact, I went around sort of the world saying that. It did feel to me that PR19 has probably drifted away from that a little bit, and it's become a bit more prescriptive, and having ODIs and performance commitments sort of mandated from Ofwat or from the centre somehow is a little drift away from that. But I think what we need to do is really sort of reflect on that philosophical shift, reflect on what's worked well on PR19, and also reflect on the latest news of the CMA referral for 4 companies referred to the CMA. And it seems like, and I know it's only a draft outcome, and I'm not as close to it as many people, of course, now, but it seemed like that was a little bit of a different outcome to the previous referrals to CMA, and I think it's therefore incumbent upon us to all reflect on what that CMA independent referral has come up with, and it's obviously challenged some of the basic assumptions that came out of the PR19 process. And I think we can learn the lesson from that insofar as an independent, with no particular axe to grind organisation, opined on things that could be changed or things that could go better. And I wonder whether that's, if we still have time for PR24, have time to do that in an independent and independently facilitated way to learn the lessons of what went well out of PR19, what we could do better out of PR19, and how we can align the regulatory framework, and it isn't just the Ofwat's regulatory framework, more closely to those challenges, which I think are commonly understood and commonly agreed by everyone in the industry: climate change, etc., resilience, customer perceptions, and so forth.
So I'm going to add to that question then, because you've covered quite a lot of ground. Do you think there were any lessons that we can learn from the devolved administration? So I was at a conference earlier this week online, and Scottish Water was saying, this is a representative from Scottish Water was saying, we've got the best model. So do you think that there are any lessons learned that we can learn from Scotland or anywhere else?
Well, yes, I do actually. I think, again, you have to be cautious about Scotland because it's a one-on-one relationship, the Scottish Water and Wix, the independent regulator in Scotland. So it's a one-on-one relationship, not a one-on-many relationship, which we have in England and Wales. So just with that sort of caveat, but it does seem to me that the relationship there is a little bit more collaborative. It seems a little bit more aligned to the long-term goals and making sure that that the water industry as a whole is aligned to those longer-term goals and objectives, and a little bit less of a you make a submission and we'll reply sort of tone. And an exaggeration. It isn't really like that in England and Wales either, but it seems like it's a little bit more collaborative, looking at the long-term goals and how we can share information to meet those long-term goals. So I think there is a style issue there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then what about the 5-year regulatory cycle? I mean, we've had discussions within British Water in the past about the impact of the 5-year cycle. Maybe water should be split from wastewater to even out the peaks and troughs. Do you think that in the future we could potentially see the sector regulated in that way? Do you think we need to?
I think the 5-year cycle is I won't say a red herring, but whether it's 5 years, 8 years, 7 years, 3 years, it doesn't really matter. I think what you do need is to have a business planning process which looks at the far horizon, but also the medium-term horizon, and that's about 5 years. So I think it was going back to PR9 when the idea of a strategic direction statement or a 25-year plan was to be used to put into context your 5-year plan. I thought that was a good development, and that's something that should be encouraged going forward. The cyclicality is a different problem. I mean, I think we in British Water have addressed this issue several times and several cycles. And there is a real issue there that there tends to be a dip in procurement the 5-year cycle, and therefore that's less than optimal, less than effective, because you do end up with a loss of skill out of the industry, and then have to re-recruit them again, and all that effort and friction is not cost effective or efficient. So I think we should be able to do that, but I would think that can be addressed as a secondary issue. I don't think you have to change the 5-year cycle. I don't think you have to split up clean water and wastewater. I think that would just make what has already become quite a complicated model with the splitting up of the business plans already into an undue complexity, really. So I think we can address that in other ways. And again, part of the problem is just being aware of the issue, because everyone should be aware that the fact that letting an alliance lapse and then not recontracting until you're clear of the outcome of the PR19, the next price review rather, is not the most effective way to do it. And it's often been said, and it's obviously true, is if you're producing a business plan, people are starting to think about business plans for PR24 already. They have a pretty good idea what's going to be in there. Yeah, they won't have 100%, but they'll have 80% knowledge. 2 or 3 years out, they'll have fairly clear ideas of what's going to be in there. So I think we can address the cyclicality in a different way other than changing the 5-year cycle.
Thank you. You kind of linked to my next question, because you mentioned skills, and we often talk about the fact that there's going to come a time not too far away where we're going to lose quite a lot of people through retirement from the water industries. How do you think we could increase diversity and inclusion in the water sector?
Well, being aware of it is the first issue, I think. And I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going to sound like I'm repeating the same thing again, but if we're engaged in this critical activity, we should be able to attract the best people possible to join the industry and want to be in the industry. And again, a little sort of reflection from me from my own experience in Pennon, really, was when Viridor Waste Management was part of Pennon. Viridor was looking at waste management, taking rubbish away, recycling, burning the waste, or putting it in landfill as an ultimate. And it wasn't really a very interesting or sort of, what shall I say, sexy sort of sales pitch, really. But then Blue Planet came along, and the public's perception changed within months about the fact that we can't just use all the resources once. We have to recycle, we have to be careful, we have to be sure that we aren't tipping things into the environment, damaging the oceans. And this became a very, very fashionable, very, very attractive thing. And overnight, the next graduate recruitment round, we were inundated with the best of the graduates wanting to join the waste industry. So again, if we want the best people to be involved in the most critical endeavour of society, almost water and sanitation, we need to present ourselves along those lines, which is the society will collapse without proper water and sanitation, and therefore we should be able to attract the best and the most diverse and the best skills. So it's about how we present ourselves again, and I say back to that issue of through the coronavirus and through the COVID tragedies, people perhaps did understand that we were key workers, and we were doing a fundamentally important thing, and how we can use that as an opportunity as well as the tragedy that it was.
Thank you, and I agree. I think it is about how we present ourselves, and we could do a far better job of not only in the way that we present ourselves, but in how we communicate what it is that we're doing and the value that we're adding. So I completely agree with that. So I'm going to touch on obviously COVID-19. So obviously, as you know, we've got a supply chain survey out at the moment, and obviously COVID-19 is having a massive impact on the business retail market, and also on consumers. And I know that obviously when you would have left recently, that was a challenge to make sure that the consumers that were vulnerable had the ability to pay their bills or had some kind of system or benefit in order to get support. So, I mean, how do you see, obviously we're now in a second wave of COVID, unfortunately it hasn't ended when we all hoped it might have. How do you see this potentially playing out over the next few months and its impact on water industries?
Yeah, well, I don't think we've seen the economic impact of coronavirus truly yet. I mean, obviously the government has been engaged in mitigating that through furloughing and so forth, but that economic shock hasn't been truly felt yet. So I think, as ever, we as an industry need to think about how our revenues are collected from our customers, and our revenues therefore are vulnerable. So we need to think about the ability of those who are struggling to meet the water charges. So that requires an enhanced, broader range of sort of customer support measures and metrics than ever before, and a better understanding of ever before of how people are struggling, who's struggling, and how we can help them with payment plans and so forth, and social tariffs and broader social tariffs and so forth. So I think that's the most important thing. We also need to take our responsibilities very seriously. There's no point shutting down a business because they haven't paid their bill, and then everyone loses their job and the business doesn't exist anymore. We need to be responsible about those things. So I think the next few months will be quite tricky. I think probably the next year or maybe even two might be quite tricky, and we need to focus on that and make sure that we're sympathetic listening like never before, and having customer engagement programs and support programs like never before. And I've seen a lot of great examples, actually, some really great examples in the water companies over the last few months, and they're to be commended for that.
Thank you. So I'm coming on to my final question. How would you like to see the sector change in the future? What does Utopia look like for you?
No, Utopia, yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because, we'll never get there, but Utopia really, I guess to me would be the debates that we often have about us and them, whether it's water companies, supply chains, it's regulators and regulated, politicians, economic regulators versus environmental regulators, a whole range of sort of divisions or a whole range of sort of artificial barriers between all those organisations. And I guess Utopia for me is that we're all together and we all recognise together that we're all engaged in this fundamentally important provision of services, and we can work totally collaboratively in partnership together. So I think that's one of the things I would see in my Utopia, which obviously one step at a time. I guess the other is what I was just talking about just now, which is the industry reputation, and the people and the communities we serve understand what it is we do and respect and trust us to do that well and appropriately. So again, another us and them divide, really. And I think another one of my utopias is really about the skills, the one you've just been talking about again, which is making sure the biggest and the best organisations, the brightest of our generation, want to work in this sector and don't see it as a dull or an interesting sector. It's a sector to really aspire to working and improving. And I guess my the Utopia is always called about big, hairy, audacious goals. I don't know if you've heard of that. BHAGs. It's an American phrase, which I hated when I first used it, but I use it all the time. Well, they use it all the time. They use it from time to time now. So one of my BHAGs is the fact that everyone working in our industry, whether it's in the supply chain, whether it's in the regulator, whether it's in the water companies themselves, technology, universities, are all proud of their endeavours, and they go to the gym or the cafe or the pub, and they feel proud to say I work in the water sector, which hasn't always been the case, and that's probably still not the case, but certainly hasn't always been the case. And there's been lots of cause célèbres where people just love to hate us, and that's not where I would see. So my biggest BHAG is everyone here is proud and feel they're making a positive change to society and to the communities we serve.
Thank you. So I'm going to be cheeky and add one more question then, because this comes on to the point about the social contract, because obviously it's been discussed at length for a few years, and there's a social contract summit that's coming up. And so how do you see the social contract playing out over the next few years? Because obviously it's going to be critical now that the communities or the water companies really do represent the communities that they serve, which ties into a lot of the things that you were discussing. So I don't think that the term social contract is going to die or disappear over the next few years.
No, and it shouldn't either. But again, my experience, and as I say, it's rather easy for me to make this observation as I've just left the water companies, and perhaps when I was there. But my experience in all of the water companies, I think universally in all of the water companies, whether they be water-only companies or water and sewage companies, that social responsibility is deeply ingrained in every single person that works there. And this caricature that we're here only for profit, or they're only there for profit and they don't care about customers, they don't care about society, is not true. I mean, it really isn't true. And I remember when I first was introducing myself in South West Water, I went down to an area in North Cornwall near Newquay, and there was a guy there who worked in our water treatment works, sewage treatment works, wastewater works, and he was the opposite of what you might regard as a water company employee. He had very long hair, big beard. He looked like he was, some hippie from the 70s or something. And I talked to him and asked him, how he found it and why he was here. And he actually said, I'm working in this industry because I love to surf. I live near the beach. I want to teach my little toddlers, kids who will now be grown up, I suppose, to surf. And to me, it's the most important endeavour to make sure that we treat the water that comes out of people's homes in a responsible way. Now, I couldn't knock that sort of commitment out of the people in South West Water if I tried. Obviously, I didn't want to try. But that isn't just one individual. People, you don't know if you remember, there was the Beast from the East a year or two ago, and people were working through the night in snowdrifts in the most difficult circumstances, not because they were being paid overtime, because they believed in what they were doing. And, those two people almost lost their lives by, they went out in the snowdrifts and we lost touch with them. We didn't know where they were fine in the end. But they did that because of a sense of commitment. And the people in the industry are like that. And the caricature that they need to be knocked into shape to be like that is just not true. It's just not true. And I don't see anybody in the industry being different from that. So the social contract is right, and we should reflect on how we engage with the communities we serve and the customers. And it's right that we should think about the mechanisms of how to engage, how to align the interests of the companies to the communities. That's entirely correct, and all power to those involved in that endeavour in terms of the conference or the summit that you just talked about. I'm very, very supportive of that. But that's how the industry is, and that's how we need to make sure it continues to be.
Thank you. I think people sometimes forget that the people who work in the water industry are also customers.
Yeah.
So we're not just completely detached at all from the sector that we're working in. So I think that's something that people often need to be reminded of. But thank you so much for taking part in Talking on Water. It was really good to hear your insights on the water industry. And thanks again for taking part.
It's a pleasure, and again, keep going with the initiative, even though we have to do it in this socially distanced way with working from home. It does feel strange. It'll be great when we can do these things face to face again and in a real place soon, hopefully.
Thank you.